Yeah. Almost
Okay.
like.
We are live, thank you. Senator Chittenden covered for me at 8:30 this morning. So you're forgiven for not announcing.
Not at 1:10 either. Right.
Anyone else wants to show up at 8:30? Okay. Let me find my agenda. And we are back today. We're gonna take a walkthrough of S30. And Judge Harvey is here. This is a magnum opus. Maybe, I don't know if you want to share this, to have an outline.
Yes, I'm gonna show you a couple of things. Just gonna- Right, Jen Harvey from the Office of Legislative Counsel. We are looking at S30. And but can you let me go to the Zoom? Right. And S30 is an act relating to updating and organizing the health insurance statutes and 8 VSA Chapter 107. The idea behind this bill is not to make any substantive changes to the health insurance statutes unless you choose to, but the starting point was not to make any changes, but really just to reorganize it into a more logical order because it has been added onto multiple times over the years. And it's not in a very cohesive or coherent order at the moment. And also to update some terminology, add some definitions that could apply across the entire chapter, so that we don't have separate definitions of health insurance plan or health insurer in every section, some of which are consistent and some of which are not, some of which include Medicaid, some do not. So I worked very closely with the Department of Financial Regulation on it. It is 180 pages. And the hard part about the bill that was introduced, which I will put up briefly here, is that because it is striking out all of Chapter 8 VSA Chapter 107, so it repeals it, and then it enacts a new one, everything looks new.
Okay.
So I also have a markup version so I will take this down here for another moment. Everything is reacting very slowly. Okay. So I will show you how I approached this, which is maybe more insight into my mental organizational processes than you need, but there's colors. So
Good.
So this is what I did when I first started to think about reorganizing, is that I went through and put all of the sections into all of the subchapters and sections into a chart, and where they were, where I was proposing to move them, and then just enter any notes like where I was putting it. So you can see, even just starting from the beginning, first, there were no real definitions, or there wasn't one existing definition. So there's a large new definition section that applies to the whole chapter. But then you can see it's sort of a combination of different, where I thought were more logical locations as you go through. So you do not have to commit any of this to memory, but just to show you sort of what that approach was. And I color coded it so it was easier to see at a glance where things should be. And then I broke it up into the various subchapters, recognizing that I took a bunch of unused section numbers from before the current chapter starts that were available. We still kind of run up against the end, which is currently 4100K, because we ran out of 4100 so long ago. We've gone through the alphabet for K. So this is just how I approached reorganizing it. And I show you this just by way of saying there is sort of a plan.
And we should probably say, for people watching on YouTube or anywhere else, that this is kind of standard practice. Sometimes when they get downtime, they go to ledge council, goes through statutes and reorganizes them just because we keep cutting and pasting. And eventually it gets very difficult to go through and find any logic in process.
Yes.
Which makes it hard to look things up for anyone that
We'll say this was a bit of a labor of love to put all this together.
I could see
But it
that.
was but it was a project. So here is the document that I, worked on with DFR and then sent around to a bunch of the stakeholders in the fall and early winter. So, and what I did is just annotate it. So if I move something from somewhere existing, I, explained where it had been and what the changes were, if it was something, or noteworthy. And then I underlined everything, just like we usually do. I underlined everything that would be new to the chapter, which is harder to see. Right here. But you can see, for example, in this one, really only minimal changes. So the rest of this is the same as existing law. So I wanted, as I'm sending it around to the insurers and the healthcare advocate and the provider groups, I wanted them to be able to see what was actually different from existing.
So rather than saying insurance coverage, you're saying insurance plan.
Right, so we're using, we're adding a definition of health insurance plan. And then we're using that term consistently throughout the chapter. We're adding a definition of health insurer and using that consistently throughout the chapter. We're creating a definition of major medical insurance because that's often, but not always, what we're talking about in this chapter. And it's helpful to know, instead of having to carve out everything that isn't major medical when we're only talking about major medical, that it was easier to present it that way. So yes, then I went through and made those conforming changes to fit with the new definitions everywhere that they were. Another change, and also just cleaned up language that was either inconsistent or confusing, I tried to get rid of legalese and gender terms. The exception to almost all of that list is there are a few sections of the statute, the current law, that have standard and optional contract provisions, and with DFR, we decided to leave the actual provisions themselves unchanged. I think the insurers may use their own already modified version of what that language said, but we were concerned about unintended consequences if we changed what they were relying on for their contract provisions. So there is some inconsistent language there, but otherwise, and so I've sent all of these to Charlotte. They're on your webpage. But some of it is just reorganizing. It's really all for clarity, ease of use, consistency, and I've built in some ability to add to the chapter over time to the extent there was room without having to add A, B, C, D.
Okay.
So the first many pages of the bill are all that. And then like first 150-ish. And then we do have a number of conforming revisions to other or amendments to other statutes. To address cross-references. And then I think the only other thing I specifically want to show you is just some implementation provisions, for a couple of interpretation and implementation provisions after that. The bill as introduced. Towards the end of the bill is a couple of sections. So this is pages 180 and 181 of the bill. Everything else is just updating those cross references. So section 31 is just some direction to mostly me when preparing the Vermont statutes annotated for publication. So once we're putting everything into the green books, we should update any additional cross references if I missed any to statutes in this chapter that use the numbering scheme in effect prior to the effective date of this act to conform to the new numbering scheme. So just update any references. Section 32 is interpretation and rule alignment. So first, I put in an interpretation provision similar to what we do for the technical corrections bill, which is basically like, hey, this bill's just trying to help. It says the purpose of this bill is to update and reorganize the health insurance statutes. It is your intent that the technical amendments in this bill not supersede substantive changes contained in other bills enacted by the General Assembly during the current biennium. It might be relying on existing section numbers. Where possible, the amendments in this act should be interpreted to be supplemental to other amendments made to sections of this chapter using the numbering scheme in effect prior to the effective date of this act. To the extent the provisions conflict, then the substantive provisions of the other acts would take precedence over the technical changes. So if I'm changing, I don't know, if I'm changing policy, health insurance policy to health insurance plan, and another bill strikes out that language, we just go with the strike out the language. We're not putting health insurance plan in because that's what this bill said. So this bill's just saying it's subordinate to anything that's actually substantive. And statutes added to or amended in this chapter that are enacted during this biennium using the existing numbering scheme would be codified in the corresponding statutes as renumbered by this act. Otherwise, we will never actually get there. And then there's a transitional piece for BFR and the Green Mountain Care Board and others saying that rules adopted and orders, bulletins, forms, and guidance documents issued by the Department of Financial Regulation, the Green Mountain Care Board, and other state agencies that refer to statutes in this is the existing chapter using the existing numbering section shall continue to be valid following the effective date until they can be amended or updated to align with the renumbering. So this doesn't automatically invalidate all of DFR's rules that rely on the current numbering scheme.
Okay.
For example, and I had it take effect on January 1st because it seemed easiest.
Does that mean you're gonna get a DFR housekeeping, renumbering everything to reflect these?
I don't think so, because that would be in their rules.
Okay.
So that would be through LCAR. And
Do it
I don't know that it's gonna, right, and I don't know that it's gonna be, you know, I don't know if they're gonna do it on a sort of wholesale basis, but probably as they update rules. So the rest, I tried to fix everything I could find that used in existing laws, other, you know, in other parts of the statutes that use references to this chapter in existing law. I've included an update.
Okay.
So that's where we are. I did not get a lot of feedback from the stakeholders I sent it to. I did get from a few, including the Medical Society, Justice in the room. So which was great. All the feedback I got was helpful, questions or clarifications, but I did not get a big outcry. I don't know if that's
Okay.
good or it means nobody read it, but
We can,
I tried. Sent it a couple times.
we can, see if anyone would like to testify. I was thinking PFR, just offer them.
Yes, and they were extremely helpful. We met many
We're
times.
fine, they're fine, okay. I'm feeling we're gonna get that response. They've all been appraised of what that. Committee questions. Oh, that Health and Welfare Committee. This is me too. No questions?
I have to go through.
Yes, Senator Hardy.
I'll spend time going through it and then talk to Jen about it. Maybe you can give me some crib notes or something.
All right, if we
Yeah,
don't,
we definitely use the markup version.
Yeah.
Because it won't make, you'll think there's a lot of policy going on if you do.
Okay.
no,
Okay.
Senator Hardy has told me that she loves these things, so I have volunteered her to be the reporter when we go to this second.
I just like to have our statutes in order.
I know.
It's a good thing.
Will you read all
It
213 pages?
Pardon me?
Read all 213 pages?
I will. It's kind of like the technical corrections bill that we do in
Very much.
GovOps every year, and for the last biennium, we did haikus for that to
Oh.
present the bill on the Senate floor. So maybe each of us will have to do a haiku for this bill.
I'm thinking maybe you could do limericks just to.
Or limericks. That could be a little dangerous, I think.
Informative.
So. Any questions? If any come up, let me know. That was the fastest 180-page bill I've ever been through. And we are way ahead of time.
I mean, I'll just ask.
Yeah.
I think it's been said, but just to reiterate, there's no new policy in the.
The intent is no new policy. I did my best to not change anything, and that was part of the reason for sending it to all the stakeholders, is to say, if you think we've changed things on you, please let us know.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. No questions? Okay, thank you.
Well, I'll see
We
you
are-
back here at 3.
Yeah,
You want to do that now?
what?
The 3 o'clock?
Well, I don't know if people were expecting it.
Wait, are you coming?
I'm coming back at 3 on the
That's
merged
right.
market.
No, because we've got everybody else
Yes, yeah,
coming in.
That's what I think.
No, committee, Jen said she'd take an hour, so we don't have anything
I said,
scheduled.
no, she didn't say
She
that.
didn't say that. We gave her an hour.
Did you?
So, I thought it'd take at least that long to go through that much, but, we are out until 2:30 when we have the Carrick Johnson appointment. And, then we have I believe it's 35 that I'm merging the group markets. That one is time sensitive, I think, because this is about the time that the market, everything gets submitted to the Green Mountain Care Board to set the rates for next year. And they'd like to have this resolved so they know where things are. Other than that, Senator Brock, did you get a response from the governor's office on the due diligence and Carrick?
I did not. I'll walk upstairs.
Are we having him in today?
Yes, he is coming in at 2:30. And then I would like to move this. I will put the vote off until the next day, probably. We have it on Thursday at 3. And, we'll see how that goes. And then we've got the, merged markets. Other than that, there is a large demonstration out front. I'm not sure who. But they were tying up traffic as I was racing to get here.
Promote democracy.
They promote, okay, that's a good,
There's a lot of them, they're very peaceful and loud.
yes,
50 states, 50 protests one day.
they waved at me as they were blocking traffic.
I heard a lot of no Elon signs. It's a lot of no Elon signs.
Yeah, we didn't vote for him, so.
No,